Welcome back to Trailmakers with Fenrir. Today we're going to be taking a look at 10 of my favorite logic systems. Starting us off, we have my 8-character display here, which, if we take a look around the back, you can see uses quite a lot of logic gates. Now those are all comparison gates, because each of these little sections here can be any letter, any number, plus an exclamation point, a question mark, or a heart. So if I just pop in it here and clear the board, it takes a minute to clear some of the later letters, but we have a white light that shows which character we're currently selecting, and then we can either scroll through one at a time or roll through them at high speed to get to the ones in the back faster. And although it was a little bit tedious to put it all together, it's relatively simple. These are all comparison gates, and each one, if I just go over here and select a random one, you'll see is selected to the shape of a letter on the hue light panels. And that's the same for every one of these. The green ones are numbers, and the pink ones are symbols. And each segment is its own thing. So if I, actually I could pull up the original here I still have. Here's just the one segment of it. So it still does the same thing, more or less. It doesn't have the fast scroll on this version, but it just uses an accumulator hooked up to all these comparison gates to select which one's active. And then the tedious part was just making each one select a letter on this panel here. So there was a lot of clicking, but a very straightforward project if you ever want to try to build one yourself. So next up, we have my hybrid torpedo gun. Now, you've probably already seen that pulse miners can launch torpedoes, like so. And you probably also already know that pistons can launch all sorts of projectiles, including torpedoes, at high speeds. But with a little bit of the right timings, you can use both methods together and shoot it even further. And that one actually cleared the end of the runway that time. So the pulse miner gets it about halfway down the runway on its own. The pistons get almost to the end, and fired together, it just goes straight off into the distance way past the end of the runway. And the reason why I'm including this in the logic is just because the timings are kind of crucial. Because in order to do this, you have to pulse the pistons once when you first launch the torpedo, and then immediately after you have to pulse a second time with the pulse miner. So it kind of does a double shoot. And I suppose since this is a very simple one, I might as well take a look at the actual specifics of the logic. We have the controls for the double firing motor on X, and we have our pistons firing immediately for a duration of 0.5 seconds. We have our pistons firing again at a delay of 0.1 with the same duration. Both these are negative outputs because the pistons are set to negative 100 speed, now that trick works again. And then the last one here is set to no delay with a positive signal, and that's for the torpedo. to launch at the very beginning there. So it's just those 3 logic gates to make the hybrid torpedo gun work. The other ones are here to make the non-hybrid systems work. So R1 and L1 are the normal pulse-fired and piston-fired versions. But that's about all there is to be said about this in terms of its logic. So let's move on. Next, I've pulled out 2 parts of my multi-part destroyer to show off our next logic system, which uses pistons and distance sensors to communicate between 2 different builds for multi-part ships and other multi-part constructions. I've seen multi-part planes and even a multi-part tank before. But it's a relatively simple idea. You just have the distance sensors line up with pistons that have shield panels on their faces. And then once the 2 builds are connected, which they use these wedges here to line up, and then pistons and anchor pins to actually make the connection. Once they're connected, if I just hop in here, you'll see that each of these pistons, well, I can't zoom, I'll zoom in post. Each of these pistons is linked to one of the functions and extends on both ends of the ship when we're pressing the buttons. So it's a pretty simple concept, because distance sensors will work regardless of whether or not there's a person in the seat or a seat at all in the build, which the front half of this ship here actually happens to have no seat at all, which is good for people not jumping into your build and ruining it or stealing it or things like that. And if I can just get myself lined up correctly here, I'm having a little bit of struggle. See, the trouble is I pushed it a little too hard and now it's drifting away from me too fast. There we go. Just before we ran out of water, I managed to get it lined up and connected. So now, we have control over all the weapons on the front half of the ship. Let's just get us out into the light again. And I'll be going over the weapon selection logic a little bit later, but we have our main turret selected right now, and we can control all the functions, even though we, if I pop out of the build, are over here in this one. And we've still got a little bit of a seam between the builds, but thanks to the wedges lining things up properly, although it is a little bit of a struggle to get them plugged in sometimes, it keeps it all nicely aligned. Like I said, I'll go over the weapon selection logic itself later, but I just wanted to show off bomb bay artillery and see how, Okay, no, I lucked out. It's really janky on the front end of the ship, so I figured I'd set it off once and see if it blew myself up, but I didn't. Anyways, let's move on. So the next bit of logic on our list is a little bit of a simple one, but it's my barrel angle limiter, which allows my tanks to have their barrels go up to 45 degrees, or even further if I want to, but limits their depression to, well, a non-specific angle, but enough so that it will clear the whole body of the tank without catching on anything. And it uses, if I just open up the top of the tank here a little bit, gotta take some pieces away, you'll notice that we have some inverted corners here, and that's because we've got a distance sensor that we have to be mobile and not connected to the roof. And the distance sensor, if I get in here, and actually I can delete some more parts and make it a little bit easier to see. get rid of these. Yes. And yeah, so if we just look in here, we've got a 1x2 wedge that our distance sensor is looking at, and that allows it so that when the barrel moves upwards, it makes the distance sensor look down, and it only sees more of a gap. But when the barrel gets depressed downwards, it lifts the sensor up, and if I can just get zoomed in here, when it starts pointing further upward, the distance between the sensor and the block shrinks as we get closer to the end of the wedge, and it sets off the distance sensor. Now, it has gotten a little bit easier to do these and make them perfectly aligned with the body of the tank and all that, now that we can do precise changes to the distance. But you could even figure out how to make this work back before that by using, oh, what am I doing? By using different blocks here instead of just using a 1x2 wedge. So different shaped blocks or just different distances between the sensor and the blocks in different settings can give you all sorts of different results on it. But if I just, yeah, you can see that we can move the barrel all the way up, and oh, I can't get out of the tank very easily, so now it's going to be all smoky. But moving the barrel all the way up, you can see the distance sensor is still not triggered. And then moving it down, once we get to a certain point, the little light clicks on with the distance sensor triggering. And what that is just hooked up directly into the rotating servos. And one of them, the rotating servos, has their speed set into the negatives so that the controls match up and the inputs match up, more importantly, so that it only takes the one output of the one output of one from the distance sensor to counteract your downwards control on the barrel. I'm probably overcomplicating explaining this, to be honest. It's a relatively simple system. But yeah, I think it's time to move on. Next up, we have my low and high maneuvering mode logic for planes. And what that means is it's a system that limits the travel of the servos and other control surfaces by 50% once it's toggled on, which is useful for fine control and for planes like this one that had the capacity to spin itself completely out with its overpowered thrust vectoring. But if I get in the air, it'll be easier to show you what I mean. So right now, we're in high maneuvering mode, and the roll is pretty manageable on this one, but let's gain a little bit of altitude first. The pitch controls are a bit aggressive, and the yaw just as much. To the point where I wasn't able to recover from that spin, even though I tried for the last, 5 seconds or so of it to catch myself before the water. But that's why we have the low angle maneuvering mode. If we set it there, all our movements are limited by 50%, and we can fully yaw and pitch without worrying about spinning ourselves out or stalling or anything of that nature. And then if we're in a fight or have any other reason that we have to maneuver real quickly, we can just toggle it off at any time and gain back full maneuverability, at the cost of being a little bit sloppier to fly. So let's just respawn and I'll crack it open and show you a little bit about the logic itself. I chose this plane because everything's kind of very exposed, everything is more or less built out of logic pieces. But in the front, we have our OR gates for pitch and roll, and the same thing on the other side here. And they're just set to 50% output, negative or positive depending on whether it's left or right, up or down. And in the back, we have our AND gates for pitch and roll, which are also set to 50%. And somewhere around here, I think it's this one, we have a NOR gate on a toggle with a 0.02% output going to our AND gates. And that allows them to be turned on without really having any extra input, so that you can still have defined control instead of having them just all on or all off. And then our yaw controls are buried in the back here. They're right in between servos there, so it's a little hard to see them. But it's a relatively straightforward system, and it just does a wonderful job at its task, at making planes easier to handle without completely sacrificing their maneuverability. It gives you the best of both worlds at your control. But anyways, that's about it for this one, so let's move on. Next on my list of favorite logic builds is autonomous systems. This one here is a BattleBot, and it's double-sided, and as you can see, it's got all the logic on display, underneath a glass panel, of course. And if I just release it, you'll see it starts navigating the arena, more or less avoiding the walls. It bumps into them a little bit, but the point is it's not smashing itself on them. And what it's currently doing is looking around for a target, so let's give it one. I'll pull out another autonomous build, but one that's far less dangerous, being that it's just a little toaster. But it has more or less the same thing going for it. It has wall avoidance, and it'll seek a target to ram into, which should make it a little bit easier for these two to find each other, instead of pulling out one. Well, that was unfortunate. Who could have predicted that? Anyways, now let's watch these two find each other. I'll hover off the ground so that doesn't happen again. Don't want to get in their way. Oh, I heard the ding of the toaster. It saw it a little bit. Oh, they're starting to find each other. The toaster definitely has found its target. But that was much the toaster's misfortune, considering the weapon on the other one. But yeah, once they get damaged, they tend to get stuck a lot more easily as soon as any logic is damaged. And I can see... Are we missing any? No, I think the glass actually held up. It's just regular stuff. Oh wait, no, we're missing a reverse sensor. Oh well. But autonomous systems aren't just for BattleBots, and aren't just for complex things either. You can make them as small as just a little car that drives around and avoids walls. Let's see, are there any other autonomous systems on display? There's the timid Ironsides that'll avoid everything, including other BattleBots. I know. As soon as USB saw something, it ran off the wall. I guess it wasn't stuck after all, it was just bored. But now it's just playing with the toaster's corpse. So I think it might be time to move on. But yeah, autonomous systems are pretty fun, especially if you like BattleBots and things like that, because those two go hand in hand really well. But moving on. So next up is our weapon selection logic, which I believe I mentioned a little bit earlier, but didn't really touch on. And if you can see, we have a set of lights on the back of the turret here that we're toggling through left and right, and that's to control the different features on here. So we can control the main turret, the hull gun, the machine gun turret, and then we have music, lights, and sound effects. So that's obviously a lot more than you can fit all on the buttons of your controller. Your keyboard players have it a little bit easier with a lot more buttons to access, but that's its own difficulties. But yeah, if I crack it open, I can start showing you how it works. There we are. So that's all disconnected in the back right now. But as you can see, we have kind of a slab of logic here. And if I just start selecting all and pulling stuff out, you'll see there's all the AND gates. Then we have comparison gates. And we should have OR gates, not NOR gates. I think I just saw a NOR gate in there from something else. And, yeah, that NOR gate is for something else, for closing the pistons at a certain distance. But yeah, this is our weapon selection panel. And if I just, to get rid of all these blinking lights, just put some more connections here. To get rid of all the exclamation points, they're annoying. We have the actual selection stuff. Oh, and we're missing one piece, that piece in the corner, which is, where is it? There it is, the accumulator. Very important. Because the accumulator is what actually runs the toggling back and forth. So we all know how the accumulator works. It sets the value. So you toggle that back and forth with R1 and L1. It's connected to the comparison gates, which are each linked to everything below it. And then on the side here we have OR gates for each of our controls. X, right, left, up, down, and they're linked across here. So it's kind of like an Excel chart. And then these are all AND gates in the center here. So when one of these is selected, only the row below it can be activated by our controls. And if you know logic, it probably already sounds pretty straightforward, and if you don't know logic, then it probably sounds a little daunting. But that's the fun thing about logic, is that it's a good challenge in this game to learn. And there's a lot of things you can do with it, obviously. But I don't want to babble too much about just one of these systems, because this is supposed to be more of an overview. We're going to move on. Next, we have my hover stabilization logic, which is demonstrated quite nicely here, because this one is stabilized in every direction, which means it can face any which way, and it will maintain its position, and no matter which direction you travel in, whether you're going forwards or strafing or going up and down, once you left the controls, it automatically comes to a stop and holds position again. And if we just drop down a little bit so that I can open it up in build mode, you can see the whole thing pops open because it's a clamshell piston glitch. But every direction is stabilized by 3 logic pieces. It's probably best shown by like these ones up here. We have a speed sensor, an AND gate, and a NOR gate. And the speed sensor is just set to 0 miles an hour and goes into the AND gate. The AND gate should be feeding into the thruster that's pointing in the same direction as the speed sensor. And then the NOR gate has the control for going in that direction against the force of the thruster. Because as you can see, this thruster is controlled by upwards, it's our rising one, but the control on our NOR gate is down. And that's the same for each of them in every direction, so that as soon as we want to go in that direction, it turns off the stabilization for just that direction. Or if we press it in multiple directions, I suppose, like if I press the whole D-pad down, then stabilization stops in pretty much every direction. But yeah, it's a relatively simple system, but infinitely useful for anything that hovers or swims and floats in any way or any medium. Can use this system to just hold its position really steady. And if you use gyro stabilizers, like we'll see in our next build, we only have to stabilize it really in one direction, but if you stabilize it left, right, forwards, and backwards, it can make for a really nice platform. But with that, I think it's time to move on to our last system. Now to finish things off, I've pulled out the Bombay Artillery Mark 18, because Bombay Artilleries have been my favorite logic for, well, a long time, since I figured out how to make them in the first place. And this one has an added bonus of having some weapon selection logic thrown in as well, because we have the box cannon as its primary fire mode, but then we can switch over to the Bombay Artillery, which sprays a volley of bombs at a pretty significant distance. And the reason why this is in the logic video is because it takes a whole lot of logic to make these things run. And if we just, I was about to delete all these to make room, but they're just not color-coded. Let's see, we can get rid of this. And, oh, nope, that was an OR gate. We can get rid of this. That's not an OR gate. Basically, this entire hunk of the arm here is full of logic on each side. And it's mostly just timings, but there's also a safety mechanism. And I suppose I can actually pull up the one of the stock versions of this weapon, if I can find it. But here's the example I was going to show. We have all of our timing OR gates, which are 4 per, I was going to say barrel, but per bomb bay. 4 OR gates per bomb bay are needed, and it's because each bomb bay drops 4 bombs, and every bomb needs its own timing for the pistons. So we've got a delay of 0, a delay of 0.27, a delay of 0.52, and a delay of 0.78. And then there's there's no delay on the bomb bays themselves or on the pistons. The pistons are set to a negative 100 speed. I'm sure everyone knows that trick already. But the only thing that's really more complicated than just timings is the safety mechanism that I have. And that's with this accumulator here. Using the accumulator, it holds the signal on for long enough that you don't drop any bombs on your feet, even if you let go of X early. So normally, if you stopped firing early and you didn't have a safety mechanism, it would not continue firing, and it would just drop the rest of the bombs straight down. But with the accumulator safety mechanism, no matter how long you hold or don't hold X, it'll continue firing all the bombs out. And it's not the most impressive logic, I know, but it is one of the most fun logics, these bomb bay artilleries. They're a very powerful and versatile weapon, and that's why they ended up in the top slot in the video. But that also wraps up the video because, well, that was it. And it's a good thing no one watches this far, because that's a very lame way to end the video, isn't it? If you liked what you saw, or want to see more on any of these logic systems, like an actual tutorial on how to build them if you need help, then please leave a comment. And if you want to support the channel, like the video and subscribe. Bye-bye now.
PlayStation